He's an assistant professor at the School of Media and Journalism at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, teaching and doing a lot of creative work in the area of public relations and advertising as it relates to the intersection of data, diverse audiences, and creative strategies. Please welcome to the stage, Joe Cabosky.
All right, thank you all for having me. I work at UNC, I'm sorry. But I married into the Wolfpack clan, and I went to an ag school, so I may just work at UNC, and unlike NC State tailgates a little bit better, because they're way more fun. Okay, so I'm pulling up the rear, which also means that I'm between you and one more beer. So I want to pick up a couple little pieces and plant some seeds for you. You've seen a lot of history from some of us today. We've seen this one, right, from where Brian started us with humanity, and then we talked about history, and right, we're talking about technology a lot, but we see that the roots go way back. These aren't new things. As you've heard a lot today, we talk about different things at different times when that issue is salient, right? But this is a famous example of yellow journalism. A lot of this occurs around propaganda and wars. This was when there was an explosion on a ship. It turned out not to be related to the Spanish government, but it was perceived to be that way. It becomes truth, socially speaking, and then it leads to war. And that's one of the things I want to emphasize, though, is anytime that we're talking about something like fake news or misinformation, what's common, though, in it, and why so many of us believe this, even if it's something like phishing, is that there is truth somewhere in here. There was an explosion, right? There is a history of how we as the United States viewed European colonies, European powers. And that's what makes, I think, this notion of figuring out the true facts of any kind of situation incredibly challenging, knowing that there's probably some aspect of truth in there. I just want to flag a couple different things here as the closing speaker, because a lot of times, again, it's right in front of our faces, and we're processing what we see. So a lot of us read the news, and by reading the news, we're often not reading the news. We are skimming the news. We go to NBCnews.com or CNN or Drudge or whatever it might be. We start with the headlines. We skim through Facebook. Our eyes might lock onto certain kinds of photos, certain kind of content. We process it, and we often move on. And I just want to show how dangerous that can be. I did a lot of research just about how information can spread about, I'm in public relations, someone like Michael Sam. If you remember Michael Sam, he was an SEC Co-Defensive Player of the Year. Pretty good normally. If you win that title in the SEC, you go on to the first round in a draft. He came out as openly gay before the draft season really started, and this was the first athlete ever to do so. His draft stock falls. The truth becomes he's a distraction to the team, or he's suddenly no longer a good enough athlete. That's how the narratives form, right? And then it's based on a selection of information. We'll go with this event where he didn't perform as well. We'll neglect several years at an SEC school. And then you find headlines like this afterwards, which kind of shaped his story. I'm not in the NFL because I'm gay. Now, when this was initially up for months, there were quotation marks around it. Now, this is from TMZ, so you shouldn't probably expect that it's all true. And yet, what's interesting is, even with a place like TMZ where we go, I know this is not credible, they include a video, which makes it helpful for you to check the truth. Nowhere in the supplied video does he actually say this quote. Okay? It is arguably a paraphrase of maybe what was his overall point over several minutes, but we have quotation marks that then become the quote. And the troubling thing is, in an age where we have a lot of traditional news outlets on the decline, right, as advertising dollars have gone to our social media and other tech companies, we see a lot of things like copying and pasting, which is why I think the mistake that we often do is we think of fake news in the time, right? It's topical because we had a president and a presidential campaign, right, where this creates this attack on media, and oftentimes I think those of us in the media need to be our own worst critics. Because then this kind of story gets shared and shared and shared by traditional news outlets. And then this headline is then also shared by you, the consumer, or you, the consumer, are seeing the misleading headline, okay? So again, then we have this notion of partisan news. Where are we? Where are you in your own processing information? A lot of you are trying, we've talked a lot about education today. And again, we talked about the definition of the other aspect of fake news is anything that disagrees with me. And we have the question of where do you go and get news then? How do we kind of combat this? There was an old social science research study. I don't want to give fake news because I forget the exact percentage. But it said something like 92% of people think they're smarter than the average person. Mathematically not possible, right? And I think that's what the perception is we often think, no, I'm educated. No, I have a PhD and I'm that faculty member that's causing you havoc. I went to NC State, or I got a bachelor's degree, or I have a professional background. I'm not susceptible. And yet we started with, here were presidents of the United States back in the days of John Adams, unsure of how to process information. So I think it's really important for us to always go, right, I don't want you to think bad about yourself. You don't have to say, all right, fine, then I'm just dumb, right? But I think we always need to check our own sensibilities, our own biases, right, within the other questions that are at hand, and not just assuming that other people are duped and not us, or other organizations are doing things improper and not us, okay? That leads us to this notion of what we do with this either professionally as organizations, whether this is just us as consumers. And my recommendation that I often work with, whether it's students or whether it's nonprofits or organizations that I work from a PR perspective, is jump outside of your algorithm box. We're trying to change this from an ethical perspective, and I'll close on this point. Right, Netflix is created for you so that if you like romantic comedies, that's what you're going to get. But occasionally, 1 out of 20 times, you might like that horror film. Whatever it might be, right? For the last 5 or 10 years, we've built up relevancy around advertising revenue because it's what you want. But then if you really think about that critically from a digital perspective, right, that means that you're only getting that partial truth, no matter who you are, right? So we're all our own worst enemies in this at an individual level or at a personal level. So I'll leave you with that.
All right. Great content there. Time for a couple questions. We've already had one from you. You need to share. Does anyone else have any questions? If not, I will come your way. Raise your hand if you have a question. Anyone? Okay, looks like you get double wolfies. Be sure to share.
Of course. So I like to call it the business of clickbaiting, which, as you showed, if anyone's been to Walmart or Target or really anywhere and you see a magazine and you just see a title and you're just, there's no way, right? Mm-hmm. But it's almost ingrained in our culture because I can't remember this presidential election, mainly because I wasn't born at the time, but it was one where I think a newspaper outlet put the headline that the opposing presidential candidate won.
Mm-hmm. Dewey defeats Truman.
Yes, yeah. Yes, thank you. I obviously was not born around that time, but it's almost ingrained in our culture because those sorts of things have been coming up every so often. I bring back to you're standing in line at Walmart or Target or anywhere, and you just see these headlines, and you're like, this can't be true. But at the same time, people buy it all the time, and they just have it. Therefore, that's why I call it the business of clickbaiting. How do we combat that? Because it's so ingrained.
Yeah. I'll give you two answers. One, I think more just at a personal level, consumer level, civic level. Is just the notion that you actually have to, get the full story, get the whole picture of that reality. So don't just skim those headlines and take that as truth. Read the full story. The other thing, though, about if it's really well done journalism, it normally includes a lot of truths and information and data beyond that. Good journalism is normally sourcing back to a different kind of study or a database or whatever it might be. So I think that's part of it. I know a lot of us are on like the business end and the tech end, so I also want to talk about that on the organizational level. I think a lot of times when we're developing products, digital products, right, the whole reason why we have headlines is clickbait, Facebook structured the way it is the notion we're making it easier for the consumer. It's what they want, and then oftentimes I think we talk about ethics like it's what we teach you in school, and then you go out in the real world and all your bosses say, yeah, sure. Well, the ROI argument in support of ethics there, right, and even changing the way that we develop some of our technology products is that you may be arguably winning the battle, right, little by little in terms of you're getting more clicks, you're getting more money from the ad revenue, But over time, what's already happened to Facebook just in the lifespan of 10 to 15 years? I was in school when it was a college-only thing. Now it is something that we doubt the credibility of. It's an information source that we no longer trust. Our distrust in news is not new. This wasn't created by a current president. It's from a million different drops of everything, right, that news did wrong or society maybe was part of over those years. So the ethical argument in doing what's right, I think, what might not seem like the ROI argument up front in the way we design our technology, is to say, well, what's the long-term harm? Not just to society and altruistic reasons, which should be enough, but even if we're in companies where we feel like we're working for bosses where they don't see that long-term vision, that's what I think we often miss. So I think it's a big ethical question, too.
All right, we are out of time.
All right,
Please give it up
thank you.
for Joe Cabosky.